Hello, my lovely friends. I'm Sarah. Welcome to Grace in My Space. Today, we are tackling part 2 in my beginner indoor plant care series. Now, if you missed part 1, you're gonna wanna go check it out because I gave a full tour of my plants in my home, what their names are, whether or not they're beginner friendly, and I gave you my top 7? I think I did my top 7 beginner friendly indoor plants that you can start your plant collection with. Today, I am going to cover some very foundational information. Sounds very dramatic. These are the things that you have to know. You just gotta know them. Otherwise, you're going to get frustrated with caring for indoor plants and it's going to feel like a waste of money and time. And so that is my goal today, to try and help you understand that plants are people too. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not that kind of plant person. But that is kind of a foundational truth to wrap your mind around, that this is a living thing. No, it's not a person, but it is alive, and there are signs and symptoms and diagnoses that you gotta do in order to keep your plants healthy and alive. So without further ado, let's take care of some plants. I thought it would be most helpful to actually show you my plant care routine with a variety of plants rather than just fill your mind with useless knowledge. I mean, it wouldn't be useless. That's harsh. But taking things like this yellow leaf that should not be yellow and telling you what it means and how to fix it, I think will be the most beneficial way to walk through how to care for plants as a beginner. First of all, like any living thing, it needs food, it needs water, and it needs sunlight, just like people. Your food comes in the form of your soil choice as well as fertilizer. Water is more than just the water that you water your plant with. It also entails humidity in the air around it. And then sunlight, of course, will be different for every plant. You see on the little tags, low light to high light, and you're like, what does that mean? I'm gonna tell you. But before I dive into all of those things that matter a lot, I also want to tell you what kind of plant person I am, because my method is a lot more based on experience and studying a plant to see how it reacts to different things. And that is gonna be really important to kind of understand as you get your first few plants, that the things that work in my home in Michigan, in a place where we have gray skies for about 6 months and high humidity and freezing cold temperatures, is going to be very different than somebody who lives in Arizona and has like the blessing of no lower than 60 degrees, but also super dry climate, hot weather, really bright sun. Those things all impact plants on a great level. So the types of plants that might work in my home probably won't work in a desert home. And that is foundation number 1, your climate matters. So when you are thinking of what kind of plants to bring into your home, take into consideration what your climate is. Are you living in a very dry climate versus a wet climate? Tropical plants versus desert plants. There's a reason that our ecosystem makes plants survive differently in different areas of the world. So tip number 1, take your climate into consideration before you bring plants into your home, because even though you might have a climate controlled home with heating and with air conditioning, it does still impact which plants are going to do well in your climate. Overarching tip number 2 is that you need to study your plants. This means there's a problem, and watching my plants, seeing how they react to different things that I do to them, is an amazing way to determine what works and what doesn't. This plant is very, very easy to care for. And when I start seeing any kind of shriveling of the leaves or yellowing of any kind, it reminds me, it's literally like a toddler saying, give me water. And that's all that I need to do for it. On the other hand, If the leaves are turning brown and just falling off immediately, it's telling me I'm literally drowning. Stop watering me. And so when you're looking at your plants and you're studying how they react to different things, that's a really important thing to note in your plant care. So as I walk you through my plant care routine and I talk about some of those signs and symptoms to be aware of, I hope that you can translate them to your home and be like, oh, this is the diagnosis for the symptom of this plant, and this is why. That's my goal today. Let's get to watering. Watering tip number 1, plants need a drainage hole. Now you can put a plant in basically any vessel. This is actually a terracotta glazed bowl that was made for serving food. And I just drilled a hole in the bottom with a masonry bit. That is extremely important because just imagine that you're a person, because you are, and you sit in a tub and you never get out. What's your skin going to do? Your skin is going to fall off. And that's really gross to think about. But the same goes for plants. If they have no drainage hole, then the water can't escape as you water it. The roots sit in water permanently, they become soggy and rotten, and the plant dies. That is the number 1 issue with most people, and it is because they just don't understand that overwatering doesn't mean that you give it too much water. Overwatering means that there's nowhere to escape at the bottom of the plant pot. Watering tip number 2, while you can water from a can into your pot, if you have a smaller pot like this, it is actually best to bring it to a sink or to a tub and water it until the water runs out the bottom. This means that you are saturating the roots fully, so I just do that. Let's see how long it takes to come out. A lot of times when people water with a can versus popping it in the sink, they only water enough for like the first ½ inch to feel like it's wet and they think that it's good enough. Well, consider where the roots of a plant are. They're not in the top ½ inch of soil, they're down deeper. So you need the water to go through your pot, get to the roots, provide it the nutrients that it needs to survive, and then run out the bottom so you're not giving it too much water. Now I'll just put this in the sink and let it fully drain before I put it back in its saucer. This is my preferred method of watering anything small enough to fit in the sink. Another reason I like to do it this way is because I can also take my little sprayer and spray off the leaves to get any dust off of the leaves, because if your plant is very dusty, the dust actually provides a layer on top of the leaf that doesn't allow it to absorb enough sunlight. If it doesn't have enough sunlight, that's where a lot of its nutrients come from. It's not going to be a healthy plant. Now, if you have a pothos or a philodendron that are a little scraggly, this one's a little scraggly, and you want it to be fuller up top, one of the best ways to do that is to give it a pruning. So chop off some of those trailing vines, because all the plant energy is going into creating those vines, and instead it will start to create energy from the soil and give you new shoots. That is how my massive philodendron has become so massive. This also works really well for the creeping fig. That's right there. We're gonna water this guy because he is showing signs of distress with some droopy leaves. Another watering issue that many people don't take into consideration is the humidity in your home. So if your plant thrives on humidity, but it's very dry where you live, misting it with some water will do a lot to help it continue to have that vibrant green. I also do this for my plants that I have back here on the top of my mantle, right over our fireplace where the air is extremely dry. Now, if you're feeling unsure on how to tell if your plant needs water by sticking your finger into the soil to see if it's damp enough, I definitely recommend a soil meter, which is another great way to tell if large plants that you cannot bring to the sink have gotten enough water. It'll tell you right away if it's moist, and that way you're not guessing. Let's talk about some signs that your plants are giving you that you need to water them. Number 1 is if your plants are nice and full and bouncy. So especially for trailing plants, this makes the most difference for plants that vine. But you see how all of these little tendrils are sticking straight up? It means this one is nice and happy because it has enough water. When this creeping fig specifically needs water, it tells me, because not only does the green change colors to a more dull green, but these little trailing vines lay down. And you'll find that when you see your vines laying down, both with creeping fig, pothos, philodendron, monsteras, a lot of your vining plants, that means that they are in need of water. This is a great example of a plant that has a lot of issues. Number one, you can see how limp all of the leaves are. It looks bad. You can tell that it needs something because it looks bad. Not only is the green leaves limp and just kind of sad looking in general, but it's also yellowing. Yellowing actually is very deceptive, stinking yellow leaves, because it can mean a lot of different things. It can mean that it needs water. It can mean that you're watering too much. But in this case, I'm pretty positive it means that I need to repot. It also needs water. It has the gap of death. Now, when I mentioned earlier that plants are people, you know that I'm kidding, but they do tell you what they need or when there's a problem, and you have to be perceptive enough and kind of keep an eye on your plants and know them well enough to see when there's a problem in order to diagnose the issue. Now, let me show you one other watering issue that many people don't know about. Do you see this gap right here where the soil is pulling away from the sides of the pot? This is an extremely dry plant. Extremely dry, it needs a lot of help. But when you have that gap around the edge of your plants, it means that it's so dry that sometimes when you end up watering it, all the water flows right through that gap and out the bottom of the pot without ever reaching the soil and the roots. So if you have that gap, what you need to do is really break up your soil before you water it and make sure that it's loose enough to accept the water and go into the roots rather than just down the sides and out the bottom without ever providing the plant what it needs. Now, this plant is clearly severely underwatered. It had the gap of death, but I've also kept up on watering it, and one of the things that it does is it just soaks it up so fast. I could water this correctly today and tomorrow it would be this dry again, and that is a telltale sign that it needs to be repotted because the roots don't have enough space and air to adequately absorb the nutrients that it needs. So this guy needs to be repotted. Now let's talk quickly about watering frequency. A lot of people like to pick a day of the week to water. You've heard of Water Wednesday. One follower actually told me that she says, Water Wednesday, Forgotten Friday. I thought that that was very grounded in reality. But the truth is that your plants aren't actually on that regular of a schedule. Yes, that might work for some really low-key plants, but going this route actually could be causing a lot of the problems that you have with plants because it doesn't take into consideration the status of your plant on that day. So let me talk about just a few different things that play into when you should water your plant. Number one, the telltale signs are droopiness and just a lackluster green hue to your green plants. That is a sign of distress. It's a signal that says, I need water. Another thing to take into consideration is the size of the pot. So my little baby 4-inch pots, they need to be watered more frequently than my very, very large pots for my large plants because the soil dries out faster in a little teeny pot than it does in a large pot like this. Another thing that plays a part in how often to water your plants is the season. So a lot of plants have a growing season and a dormant season when they're out in the wild. it translates to indoors. So even if you have an outdoor plant that you've brought indoors, it still has a growing season and a dormant season. So during your growing season, your plants are going to need more water. They're also going to need more sunlight. And so you do need to be aware of what your plants are doing as you water them. So if you have a regular schedule like Water Wednesday, and you go to your plant and it's not drooping and the soil feels damp and it is a dormant season and you water it anyways, you are going to overwater and you're going to kill your plant. I am sorry to say. So while it's great to have a weekly rotation or a bi-weekly rotation just for your own memory, make sure that you're assessing the plant before you water regardless of if it needs it or not. While we're here, let's talk a bit about sunlight. This fiddle leaf loves this north-facing window, even though most people tell me that it's too dim. I don't know what to tell you. This is why I do plant care based on my own experience, because everybody's house is different. Now, when you get a new plant and you see the little tag and it says low light, what does that mean? So the lowest light is usually a north-facing window, and the brightest light is usually a south-facing window. East and west are where your medium, moderate light ranges are. So there's a quick decoder for you. Now, when your plants are large like this, and when they're small, but mostly when they're large, you're going to want to rotate your plant. If you don't rotate your plant, then one side is going to grow larger than the other side. Usually I'll do about a quarter turn every 2 weeks so that it gets even light around on all of the different sides of the leaves. And this is especially important for fiddles because they have such a large flat leaf where all the nutrients are absorbed into. So this side right here is getting all this light and it's blocking this side, which is shaded. Now, just like when I mentioned that you need to spray off the dust on your plants if you're watering them in the sink, the same goes for large plants that you cannot bring to the sink, especially flat-leafed plants like a fiddle or like a monstera. I usually just use a wet microfiber cloth and wipe down each leaf individually. Let's talk pests. Number 1, gnats. The number 1 nemesis of all indoor plant lovers. It's not a pretty thing. If you start seeing gnats in your home and you don't have a bunch of rotten fruit somewhere, they're probably coming from your plants. These are a great option for catching the adults, but if you're only ever catching the adults, then you're not killing all of the larvae living in your plant soil. Gross. Now in the description, I'm gonna link a couple of things that you can use for your soil. Neem oil is a popular one. There is another one that I will link that's kind of like a mosquito killer, but works for gnats. And also my mother gave me a tip, which I believe she heard from a nursery worker, not the baby's plant kind of nursery, that if you put about a 1/4 inch of horticultural sand on the top of your plant, then it makes it more difficult for the gnats to lay eggs and hatch and grow within the soil. So as soon as you notice gnats, get on top of it, because once you have an infestation, it is extremely hard to get rid of it, and they can hop from one plant to another until all of your beautiful plants are infested. And that's not fun. Now, the likely cause of your gnat problem is either overwatering, which can be done very easily if you don't have the proper drainage and if you're not using the right watering techniques that we talked about earlier. So a really moist soil is the perfect condition for larvae to grow in and then hatch, and then they become adults, and then the adults go and they plant more larvae in your soil, and it's just this ridiculous revolving cycle that's really hard to maintain once it's started. So don't overwater your plants. Another likely case is they came from the nursery or from the place that you bought your plants. So if you are not buying your plants from reputable sources, sometimes they can already be infested and then you're bringing them into your home. Also a very sad day. So once you've noticed your plant having gnats, pop something like a sticky fly trap into the soil and see how quickly it gets disgustingly covered. And you'll know pretty quickly if you have just a few issues or if you have an infestation. At the same time, you're going to want to start treating your soil immediately with one of the items that I've linked in the description. And if you have found something that works perfectly, works wonders that I didn't name, drop it in the comments so that we can all gain knowledge and learn about a new product that will eradicate the gnats from our homes. Solidarity. But that should help calm down your gnat problem, attacking the adults, attacking the larvae, making sure you know which plant is the problem, because if you have a sticky trap in your rubber tree and it's not getting any gnats, but you still have gnats everywhere else, then it's another plant in your home that's likely the problem. So I would pop sticky traps into every single plant, see which one has the most, and then that's your problem plant. Either take it out of your home so that the rest of your plants don't get infested, or go ahead and try and treat it the ways that we talked about before. Now, we haven't chatted a lot about fertilizer, but I do use a specific fertilizer for my fiddle leaf fig, and I also use these Miracle Glow plant spikes. But you know what? There are a lot of different ways to fertilize your plant, and every person that you talk to will swear by their method. But I don't feel overly passionate about a specific fertilizer. I like the plant spikes because they're really easy. You just pop them in. You don't have to add them to water every time you water your plants. They're already in there providing the nutrients that they need. And this one has helped my fiddle leaf look greener. So I'll link what I use in the description, but you should be fertilizing your plants based on their own needs. If they're looking a little sad, they might need a little bit more nutrients. Now, if you haven't noticed by now, I am not one of those plant people that tells you that you must do X, Y, Z in order to be successful. I'm more of an experiment as you go, watch your plants, observe how they're reacting, and then take action based on your own home, your humidity, your climate, how often you have time to water your plants, and what happens when you do. And so I'm a pretty basic plant person, I would say. But these are the items that I find most necessary. Number one, a soil meter, especially for those who tend to underwater or overwater your plants. Number two, grow pots. Perfect because I really love to put my plants into pots that you buy in the store that don't have drainage holes. And I don't like to drill drainage holes in every single one because they're usually heavy, and to transfer the whole pot over to the sink is really difficult. So I plant them in a grow pot, which also makes it easy to move up sizes when you need to repot. And then I put them into ceramic or other pretty planters. Three, are we on number three? These sticky fly traps and neem oil, or the other one that I linked in the description. You're gonna need them. I hate to say it, but you will. Really sharp scissors or pruners that are specific to your plants. These are little teeny things. Get whatever size you want, but they need to be sharp, they need to be clean, and you need to use them only for your plants and wash them after every use so you don't spread disease from one plant to another. Great for pruning. And of course, the watering can. If it's pretty, even better. And then an assortment of beautiful planter pots. I really love the look and the way that they make my home look decorated, even though it's just a plant, because of the planter pots that I use. You have endless supplies and options available to you. I'll link some of my favorites in the description below. And that's about it. Those are the main materials that you need to care for indoor plants, and the knowledge, hopefully, that you just learned from this video. Now, I was originally going to talk about propagation and repotting in this video, but I feel like it needs its own. So stay tuned for part 3 of this series where we're going to dive into propagating vining plants, monsteras, how to repot, and more coming next week. I hope that you gained some information that's going to make you feel more confident in caring for indoor plants from this video. If you already are a plant person, drop your best tip in the comments and let's learn from each other. If you have additional questions on things that I didn't cover, also drop that in the comments and I'll see if I need to make a part 3 or if I can give you some resources that are available on my blog already, as I do have a lot of indoor plant care tips on my blog, most of which I can link very easily for you in the description if you want to browse those too. Thanks so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed just a little bit of information on indoor plant care. Very beginner friendly, I hope, and that you are encouraged and feel confident to bring some plants into your home and to make your home just kind of come to life. Look how pretty they are. They're so pretty. And if after all of that you were like, there is no way I am bringing another living thing into my home, faux plants. Faux plants are your answer. Make sure to hit the subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and I'll see you next week.